Very exciting day today. No other than Patrik Rolf on board with us today for the Brew Better show. From a Silicon Valley technology nerd to a coffee world competing pro. Very excited to have you on board. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be a part of it as well.
Awesome, man. I can't even tell you how excited we are at South Africa to be having you and hosting the April Brewers competition. Can you tell us a little bit about that coming up and kind of how that got started?
Yeah, definitely. So, long story short, I think I'm always been quite involved in different competitions. And I got to a point where, we have our own brewers, made that a few years ago to compete in the kind of international competitions. And being someone that competes in coffee a lot myself, I know that one of the biggest obstacles is the fact that we really don't compete that often. So if you look at the official competitions, they're like once a year. If you're good, you get to compete in the World Championship. So you compete twice a year. And there's a lot of really, let's say, fun, valuable competitions in other kind of genres in coffees. But a lot of them is a little bit more, let's say, more party and less get ready for a world championship. So I kind of wanted a competition
Yeah.
that fits in the structure of educating a little bit more and getting people the opportunity to be a bit stressed, be on stage, actually have to deliver in front of a crowd, which there's so many talented coffee people in the world. And when they start to competing, whether they're home baristas or professionals, the biggest obstacle is actually the competing part. It's not the coffee part. So one of the
Yeah.
main reasons was really to create a situation where people can compete more often and get valid feedback.
I think that's really cool because some people have mixed views on competitions itself, which we'll get to later. But I think that just that point, the repetitions, like if only once a year you're getting an opportunity to be mic'd up and speak in front of a crowd while doing the craft that comes comfortable, it's difficult to get in those solid reps. Where if any other sport, obviously you're going to be doing it as often as possible.
Absolutely right, and I think it's just a great analogy, right? And I think for anyone that wants to actually become better at it, eventually win the national championship first and then win the world championship, like you need to practice more often, and you need valid feedback. You need to be able to be guided as well, right? One of the things with the official competition structures is that a judge is not allowed to give you feedback, which sounds a bit strange, but
Mm,
actually makes a lot of sense because it's to, let's say, give everyone the same kind of level playing field. But in our competition, we actually sit down with the competitors. We talk about, this is what you can do better. This is how you can improve. So it's been a really interesting journey so far. We had it in quite a few different countries, and South Africa is really special because I never been before as well. So I'm quite excited myself.
Oh, oh, crazy, man. Oh, amazing. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's gonna be really cool.
Yeah,
I've
we
only heard
we are
really
too,
good
man.
stuff, so I'm excited.
That's good. Yeah, with the April Brew, I was actually quite, in today's time we have so many different types of brewers, methodology and everything out there. On your website, you guys mentioned that when you wanted to help people brew better coffee, you were thinking about it and found the April Brewers. There was this missing link, and it came down to the way it's brewed in relation to the modern way of roasting. What exactly was the thought process? What made you think like we need another type of brewer in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, but back then, we should say that there's been, when created that, what, about 4 years ago now, 3 years ago maybe, there really wasn't that. I mean, you had Kalita and you had V60. That were like the two main brewers that
Mm,
everyone had. Occasionally, someone used like a Chemex or, maybe a Siphone if they wanted to be a bit fancy. And they're all
yeah,
great brewers, and everyone should always try as many different brew methods as possible. But I think one of the challenges is that how you roast a coffee makes a big impact on how that coffee should be brewed. And a lot of the brewers at the time, when I kind of created April Brewer, they were all based on a very old school style of roasting that is significantly different from what April and a lot of other roasteries are doing today, right? So
yeah.
basically, to not overcomplicate things, the lighter you roast, the more different the water is going to go through the coffee. So you need a brewer that is adjusted to what we call then a different flow rate, so how the water goes through the coffee. And that became the April Brewer pretty much.
Okay. And in your 2024 World Brewers Cup set, you mentioned to the judges how the shape on the sides, like the little wings, controls the
Yeah.
over and under pressure. What were you referring to with that?
Yeah, so you have the wings, and then you have the filter holders on the inside in the actual brewer. You have like three little tabs almost. And basically, when we brew coffee, we discuss when we what we call under pressure, which is basically steam that is building up from hot liquid going up, and then overpressure, which is basically just the temperature going down, right? So you always have two styles of pressure when you're brewing. And then the little pockets and the little holes on the outside is there to alleviate the pressure in a way so that the water can go through the coffee evenly. Because the lighter you roast a coffee, the harder it actually is for the water to go through the coffee. And you can change that by just regulating that pressure. A lot of people, I always give this as kind of an analogy or example. A lot of people are used like the Chemex brewer, like a large glass brewer, and then you have a big paper filter in it as well. And that usually kind of
Yeah.
clogs up and the brew stops. And then you lift up the filter, and then all of a sudden the coffee goes through really quick. And that's just because you change the
Yeah.
pressure. So it's really a similar idea in recognizing the impact on the pressure when you're, or the steam really when you're brewing.
Yeah, that's I was thinking it had something to do with that, and I think the Chemex is probably the best way I've seen that because many times I've brewed, I'm like, man, the drawdown is taking forever, and then you
Oh,
just
sure.
lift it, and all of a sudden, you had the little air on the
It
side,
like
but it's
gushes
still
through, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, okay. So I mean, and that's very cool. So that was something. Did you first start out with like just a straight round lib similar to the V60s, or was that always something that you wanted to tackle?
So the first kind of test before I decided to even make my own brewer was always like V60 versus Kalita. So V60 cone brew, Kalita flat. And I always find, and basically since, I mean, I don't know, 5, 6 years, I've only brewed coffee on flatbed brewers. And
Oh,
the main reason for that is that I feel that a flatbed brewer gives a more uniform or balanced taste experience because the level of coffee in the filter is just more uniform, right? So I always find that a flatbed brewer gives a better quality of coffee in the kind of mid to low temperatures. And especially when you compete in coffee, the lower temperatures are really important because that's the last time a judge will
yeah,
taste your coffee. So if it doesn't matter if the first temperatures are really, really tasty, if that low temperature is not where you need it to be, right? So for me, it was
yeah.
always about flatbed brewers and then just experimenting with that, right? And Kalita is an amazing brewer, but it's just made for a different style of roasting, really.
That's a great point as well. Leaving them, I mean, obviously with anything, the first impression could be important, but with that last cool bit, even when we had our cafe, we'd often tell people like just leave at least a little bit till it gets cold. Like you may want to drink it all up when it's hot, but that last bit, that extra bit of sweetness and clarity that you get, which is clever, I guess, when competing. So for the people competing in the April Cup, that would be something for them to also think about.
They should for sure consider the low temperature, right? And I mean, we're not, it doesn't have to be cold coffee. I think no one really loves cold coffee, including myself, right?
Yeah,
But coffee has this kind of sweet spot at, let's say, between around 30, 35 degrees Celsius, where if everything kind of aligns, then that's when the coffee really gonna shine and you're gonna be able to taste all those kind of beautiful flavors that are in there, right? So a lot of cups are like, let's put it like this: it's easier to brew a tasty cup of coffee if you only evaluate the hot temperature. It gets a lot more difficult if you also have to consider the hot, warm, and cold temperature, because a lot of coffees gets worse as they cool. And when you compete, the name of the game is having a cup that gets better as it cools.
some good insight for sure. Do you think the temperature has anything to do? You said like 35, 36. Do you think it's a coincidence that kind of best matches our like internal temperature, or do you think it has something to do with that?
I'm sure it's a combination. It's I don't know all the details, but I would definitely say so. And it's just the clarity of what's in the coffee, good or bad. It's just that's where I find it to be the most intense. Yeah, it's just something that same with espresso, for example, right? A lot of people drink espresso way too hot, so they're not actually able to taste what's in the coffee, right?
And with the obviously this is talking about competition and baristas who are wanting to compete there. You started an incredible YouTube series on April's YouTube channel with home brewers. And I remember watching episode one. I believe it's about over a year ago that it started. Since then, you guys are 43 episodes up, which is crazy. Where basically you travel and you get to brew. You see how people are brewing with their April at home. What's been from episode one? You mentioned two things that really stood out in our culture: to have an open mind always, and that home brewers are sometimes some of the best brewers. That even as professional baristas, there's something for us to learn from them. Why in today's like culture with competition is it so important to have that open mind?
I think it's, I mean, there's so much that goes into it. And I mean, that's also reflecting on my own, let's say, kind of coffee journey, right? And part of why I started this series, there's always a level of selfishness in what anyone is doing, right? And for me, it was like I wanted to be a little bit inspired. And I think homebrewers, they don't have this filter that I think a lot of professional baristas do, right? Where if you've been around long enough, you already have in your mindset you don't do that and that's wrong, and you don't try that or I already did
Yeah,
that. And then you come home to a home brewer and they do the weirdest possible things, right? Like things you would never, ever really try. And I remember when I started in coffee, like I did a lot of, just also slightly stupid things, right? But, fun, you tried everything just for the sake of trying. And I think the more experience you get, the more you lose track of that a little bit. Um, you get a more, let's say, defined idea of what you like and what you don't like, and you kind of try to stay away from the stuff you don't like. Whereas I find a lot of homebrewers just brew for the sake of brewing, right? It's not even always about making it tasty. It's about, I heard about this new thing, I'm going to try it. And I think that kind of
yeah.
openness that they have is very inspiring. I learn a lot. I've learned so much from this series. It's also, like you said, 43 episodes, but I'm trying to figure out how many countries, but it's maybe 10, 12 different countries as well, right? So you really
Well,
see so many different people from all over the world kind of approaching brewing completely differently. So I've learned so much from that series, and there are a lot of things that I've kind of taken back home, adapted slightly to kind of fit my style, and is now kind of using on a daily basis as well.
what has been some of the biggest or maybe most surprising things you've learned from them? Obviously, you mentioned homebrewers don't really have the filter, sometimes do weird things. So what's been some of just the most surprising things you've taken away from them?
I mean, I think one of the well, there's like two things. One, they're very very into this whole freezing of coffee concept. So the idea of freezing down coffee beans or freezing down ground coffee, which is something I never really digged into so much or really thought was so interesting. So that's something I've kind of started to do and play around with a lot more. But I think the most interesting thing I've seen actually, and that was in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia, where we were with someone that kind of, she started her brew very normal, like hot temperature water and everything. And when she did the last pour, she just took like cold tap water pretty much and poured straight into her coffee brewer. And it took me like, and this is all live, and I never know what the people are gonna do before we do it,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So it took me like 2 seconds to kind of understand like what are you actually doing. And then basically, so she brewed. I think she had 3 pours in the brew, and the first 2 pours was with kind of traditional 92, 93 degrees Celsius, and then last pour about 100 grams was really just tap water, like cold water, directly into the brewer. Um, and she argued that that had a big impact on, let's say, mouthfeel or texture and how the flavors were displayed in the cup. And that was, something I would never really try myself. Like that wouldn't really come to
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
And it's been really interesting and something I'm trying a lot now as well. Um, then
Oh
on
really?
top of
Oh.
that, it's just, yeah, for sure. It's like these different temperatures also, if you do multiple pours, and you had the opportunity to try just different temperatures. Super, super interesting. But then you have just in general, they're so geeky when it comes to equipment. There's so much coffee equipment out there these days, and a lot of these homebrewers they have all of it pretty much. So No, it's been really, really interesting.
It actually reminds me only now while you were chatting, we once ran like a blind coffee pour over competition just for locals, also mostly home brewers. And one guy, we were missing one person, and we gave him a bag. We're like, hey, play around with it, come brew. And when he showed up, everyone was like hand grinding, doing the thing. And he took out a hammer in a plastic bag, and he was like hammering the coffee to different
Sure.
sizes. And he brewed it, in some, like, he knew nothing about coffee, but he had played for a week. And when we gave it to the judges blindly, he won the first two rounds. And we were
Oh, wow.
like, we
That's
couldn't fathom it because people were, the judges had no clue, and I didn't tell them. And like, it just obviously,
yeah.
we wouldn't recommend that. And it's not maybe the
Mm.
most repeatable thing, but it's funny sometimes.
Sure, and I think it's a good analogy to kind of link it back to the competitions as well. Is that when we watch the people in the world championships compete in coffee, you see these really cool tools, and a lot of people do very, let's say, strange or new stuff, but a lot of those things are actually not based on necessarily that the coffee will taste so much better. It's based on there's a need to bring some kind of innovation. So you do a lot of stuff that really doesn't have so much impact on the taste experience, but it looks good for the judges, kind of. And I think
Yeah.
the homebrewers, they just don't have that filter, right? They don't have to. They don't have to win a competition. They're just trying. And I think the person with the hammer, right? Sometimes you need to remind yourself that there are many different ways to make tasty coffee, right?
Yeah.
And you need to kind of continue to explore them in order to improve yourself.
I think that leads perfectly into just a little game I wanted to play with you, which is just ranking brew variables. So off of what you were just saying, now obviously sometimes we stick to things and methods just because it's what we've been taught, and then we don't really try to stray too much off of that. Thought of just a fun little game. I have 10 variables for you, brew variables, and I'm going to go through them one by one, and I just want you to give them a rating on their level of importance. So if you rate it 10 out of 10, that's super important to you and the final cup, and then 1 out of 10 would be the lowest, like, it makes no difference.
It's easy.
Okay. First one is the type of filter you use.
7.
7. Cool. And water quality?
I'm gonna say a 9. Like it could be a 10, but I want to say 9 because you can have the best coffee in the world. If you use, let's say, Copenhagen tap water on that coffee, you're just gonna ruin it. So it's gonna be really important. Yeah.
The shape that you pour in?
2.
2. All right. Coffee quality?
10.
10.
100% the most important variable. Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
type of device you use?
Put that on probably a 7.
A 7. And do you think that relates to the specific type of coffee you're brewing with?
I would say no. For me, a brewer is more overall style, kind of like what we talked about before, where a flatbed brewer would produce a certain style of a cup, and I think that's true for almost all coffees you're brewing. So I would say it's more of a stylistic choice than anything else. Kind of like a light roast or a dark roast. Both can kind of taste good, but you'll still be within a specific category.
The height that you pour from?
Probably a 5. That's something a lot of people I think are underestimating because you have a big difference in turbulence, and the difference in turbulence is going to change how the water goes through that coffee. So let's say flow rate wise, where you pour actually has a really big impact. Also, the speed of the pour. So
Okay.
the amount of volume of water per second is actually also really important.
So flow rate was one of those. What would you rate flow rate?
Um, if I could, I would put it on the same because I think they
Okay.
link very close, or maybe a 6 then, right?
Okay.
But that makes a huge difference. And flow rate is an interesting one because you can change that through how you pour. If you pour really slow, you have a slow flow rate. If you pour really fast, you have a faster. If you pour in a circle, you're gonna have a slower flow rate. If you pour in the center, you have a faster. If you used a fast filter, or depending on the microns on the paper filter, that can change. Obviously, grind size. So a lot of the kind of taste experience is linked to flow rate for sure.
Well, Water temperature?
I think I've already used that one, but if I could say like a seven again ish, or like seven or eight, more
Okay.
because I think most people are within a very okay range. If you sit at like 92, 94 degrees, you're good to go. But it's also one of those things that if you are way out of bounds, like way too low, way too high, that can have a negative impact. And as I said as well, we had this home brewer that mixed water temperatures and then made it actually really taste a lot better, right? So I think there's an opportunity to make a tastier cup of coffee by being really geeky, but it's also quite difficult thing to be geeky with.
Yeah. And then contact time?
Contact time, I think I would link that to flow rate as well. But let's say total brew time. So I would say that would also be up there in like a seven or eight. Because if that goes way too fast, you're not going to be able to extract as much as you want to. If it goes way too slow, you're going to start extracting stuff you don't want to. So it's definitely among the more important variables.
And then ratio?
Ratio also would be up there. I have a feeling I'm putting a lot of things at the same numbers now, but um, where it's again is one of those fundamentals, right? If you and most of them have the basics right, you work with like a 1 to 16, 1 to 17 ratio, 1 to 15, you'd be fine. But I think some people are brewing, which I see a lot when I travel to, let's say, home brewers in Asia. Maybe they do a 1 to 11, 1 to 12, which is
Oh,
really a lot of coffee and very little water, and then it's going to be difficult, right? So I think you need all of those basics to work. So definitely a six seven, or maybe a 6 10, because I don't think I use six.
okay. So to go over them, this I won't include, but I forgot to type the first two. So filter type, you gave that a?
Filter type, I think we put up at like seven ish, seven
Yeah, yeah, I
eight.
got seven. Water quality
Yeah.
nine, pour shape two, coffee quality 10,
Yep.
brew device seven, pour height five, water temp seven, ratio six, flow rate six, contact time eight.
Yeah. So a bit confusing, but I think it's some of those variables really are, they are very important. So it's hard to there's just certain basic things that if the basics are not there, everything else will be so much more difficult, right? And obviously the green coffee, the roasting, the water, I think those are the most important basics. Then I mean, you can do as the guy with a hammer if you want to. If that's a really amazing coffee and you smash it and pour some water, chances are it's gonna you're gonna be able to taste that potential. But if you take a really bad coffee, put that with a world champion brewer, it's still not going to come out tasting very good, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is a tough one to rate them, but well done. I mean, if they're important, they're important, right? You can't cut them out. You can't cut out the basics.
True.
Yeah. Going back to some of your sets in both your 2023 World Barista competition and your 2024 World Brewers Cup competition, your opening line for both of them was "Life is like a box of chocolates."
Sure.
And so using it twice, must be a little bit significant. So can you take us where that line came from and why it's important to you, what it means?
So I mean, that's an old, that's like a Forrest Gump quote from that movie, right? Where it's like life is a box of chocolate. You never really know what you're going to get. And I think first of all, in general, when I do presentations, I try to make it a little bit more interesting for, let's say, the audience or the people that are maybe not, let's say, into what we're doing, because these competitions can feel very alienating, or very very different from what a normal
Yeah.
guest would necessarily understand. So the first time I used it, it was really just a reference to processing, because I did a presentation about how innovative processing styles, and this is a good example of coffee in general, when there's new things coming into to the market, and now we see, like, say, anaerobic processing, or yeah, just different style of new fermentations to coffee at origin. There's this idea that everyone knows what they're doing because we're doing it, therefore we must know what we're doing. But there's a lot of things in coffee we really don't understand, which we don't talk about a lot. That goes to roasting and brewing as well, but especially on a farm level. So for me, it was trying to highlight the importance of these new styles of fermentation is really very random. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's something we should explore, but we need to understand how random they are, right? And then now recently when I competed, I think I just wanted to just kind of link back into that. I think it's just a nice line to start with. It puts a smile on the judges' faces, and I think they get a little bit excited to see, okay, what is he gonna do next, right? So it's just trying to be a little bit more personal and a little bit more individual in the presentations I kind of bring to the table.
Yeah. That's a interesting point thinking about the audience sitting around as well. Because you're right. I mean, I've only competed once at national the semifinals, but sometimes you can get so zoned in just to the judges in front of you, and if you're just watching a set in the background, a lot of people walk past super confused at what is this, what's going on. So how important is that? Does that actually play a factor into a lot of what you prep for, or just like the small things?
I think, I mean, for in terms of winning the competition, I don't think it has any
Yeah,
importance really. But I think that there's a part of me that goes, we should remember that these competitions were originally created to make people that were not coffee professionals excited about coffee. That was like the essence of it. It was a marketing tool, right? It was like showing the world that, there's all of these interesting, important stuff about coffee. And I think in order for us to make more people interested, we need to also communicate in a way that might be interesting and relevant to them, right? Because a lot of our, I always say, which sounds weird, but competitions in a way is a bit kind of incestuous in the sense that we talk to a very specific small crowd. And I think I can feel how difficult it is for, let's say, someone that is just getting started in coffee, or someone that drinks coffee in a coffee shop but doesn't really know about the competitions. It's hard to relate. Like it gets really
yeah,
pretentious, it gets really geeky. And I've always seen, I'm here for that as well, but I think there's a bridge where we can be really good at what we do, but also communicate it in a way so that other people can understand and learn and get inspired and get into it eventually, right? Because that's what we need people to do in the first place.
yeah. I think that's the best actually analogy or picture I've had of competitions. To be honest, like I love them from the nerdy perspective and watching it, but I also dislike it remembering myself getting into it and the pretentiousness of it, right? Like the words we're using and everything, because most customers are never going to have that interaction with the barista in that sense, or with that type of coffee and that, crazy signature beverage. So, but I mean, I think CrossFit's a great example of that. I mean, sport wasn't very popular, and then they used the CrossFit games to like promote the sport, and then the sport grew. And I think that's actually great because I would love to see
Sure,
that for the industry.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it's, that's in a very small way, that's what we're trying to do with the April Brewers Cup as well, where it's just like creating a format where, because we see mainly homebrewers competing. Those are almost like more excited to compete than the professionals. And I think it's a way to kind of open that door to someone that aren't ready to take that big step, but they're there for like the small step, right? So they can take that small step, and then eventually that big step is not so big anymore, right? And it's it's this classic thing where I think most of us, when we started in the industry, it was the small guys versus the big guys. Commercial
Yeah.
coffee and all of this, and then all of a sudden you have so many small guys and girls and women and everyone playing, and it gets so difficult for the small individual one that you lose sight on the fact that we're fighting against the big ones. We shouldn't be fighting amongst the small ones, right? But I think yeah, we're at a point where we kind of lost track a little bit of that. So I think it's all about opening up there's still people drinking coffee at Starbucks or Costa Coffee or
Yeah.
whatever the names are. Let's get them into our doors, instead of kind of fighting between the small ones, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. When even on your website, you guys, you mentioned that you guys always strive to improve, and that as team members, you're regularly competing, and you see it as a great way to improve and learn. What is that for people, for baristas who maybe think it's a bit too pretentious for them or something? What's your advice to them or input on why you think it still has a very important place?
I think in general, baristas, I think is too pretentious. They need to kind of get over themselves. I think in a way where it's whatever you make it. I
Yeah,
think that's why I get a little bit disappointed is the wrong word, but I have this conversation with a lot of people, and they say like competing is not for me. Like I don't want to do any of that, or I don't like that. But then it's like people lost track of the fact that well, you can actually choose what you're bringing to that competition. You can choose what you do with that process, right? You don't have to do it the way that everyone else is doing it. And I think that's something that on all levels of competitions we kind of forgot. And I think, in terms of creating coffee businesses, we forgot it as well. Hence why so many of us are kind of generic companies that all do the same thing. But there is a lot of room to bring that personality into the coffee, I think, in all aspects of it. And competing for me is has always been a way to just self improve, get better at coffee. Um, it hasn't been much about let's try to win things. It
yeah,
has been a lot okay, but I need to try to get better. And I think I speak for most people that maybe been in that world championships, but even on a national level, spending 2 3 days with baristas all over the world that are also trying to win a world barista championship, that's a pretty inspiring place to be, that you
yeah,
meet so many people that they're so into it and they really want to. Sure, you have some pretentious douchebags and you have some random, you have a good mix of
yeah,
everything,
yeah,
right? But I still think that setting is so inspiring. And again, right, it's you have the opportunity to make it your own version of it, right? And I think it's a shame that not more people see it like that and take that opportunity, right? Because it's also a lot of fun. And I think maybe a lot of people have lost track on that fact, right? It's not all about winning. Most of us don't win, right? I mean, I never won a world championship. I came pretty close, but
yeah.
technically I haven't won anything, right? But I'm still enjoying it, and I'm still kind of doing the most from it. And a big part of why I am where I am in the industry and with my companies is because of these competitions, right? And it's not because of result; it's because the people I met, and it's because the skills I improved through them.
Yeah, I think even the part that you mentioned is so important. I've also told a lot of people like just go to one, whether to compete for fun or spectate. And when you're there for the 3 days, the amount of networking that happens, inevitably you're going to get a taste of coffee from someone that you wouldn't otherwise have got the opportunity to. You see people brewing, and for a world, it's like, or for those few days, you're like in a whole different world almost. And that, like you said, so inspiring, and you're going to leave with some, amazing thoughts. Or, oh, maybe I can shift the cafe like this. And people's numbers on your phone. Like there's so much more to it than just the set that we think, maybe too fancy or pretentious, but all the networking around it as well.
Absolutely. I mean, my very first competition was as a not even a coffee nerd. Like I was a regular in a coffee shop, and I learned that you could compete in coffee. So I kind of signed up without really knowing anything about coffee. But I think because of that first competition, as kind of a home nerd without an espresso machine, I signed up for the barista competition and did that, and I was just so amazed over how into this people were. And I understood that there was this whole kind of group of people that really thought this was very important, right? So I always say to everyone, just do it, right? It's up to you um, what you kind of build into that, right? But just have fun with it. And it's always I say that competing, and why I still do it is that I get 15 minutes on stage where I get to serve four people that really wants to drink my coffee, and they will listen to what I have to say about the coffee, which is in our industry that's a very
Yeah.
rare thing. You don't have a guest in a coffee shop that comes in and goes like, "I'm going to sit here for 15 minutes and listen to you, and then be super excited to try your coffee." That's very rare,
Yeah.
right? So for me, I'm just super excited that I get the opportunity to have someone that will actually sit there and just listen to me, right? So, there's so many different ways you can look at it, but as you say, the most important thing is really the network and the community that you get coming out of it. And it's also a way to show to the industry that you
Yeah.
care, right? It's a way to give back. It's a way to show that I'm in coffee and I want to be a part of shaping it. Hence, I'm active in these events and on these competitions, right? So it's not just about you, right? It's about the bigger perspective as well in
Yeah.
coffee.
And even if someone is trying to make it about themselves initially, when you get there and you see so many different things, like it's good for to kind of just start breaking those walls as well. Because like you say, as all the small individuals, it's easy to just try and win, with your own cafe, your own roasting style, and see everyone as competitors. And then you get there, and majority of them are super happy to teach and to just enjoy each other. Like you say, there's always a couple of people that just stick to themselves, and you know, um, but yeah, it's so good to break down those barriers.
Absolutely, and I mean we need to, right? I think it's in the end of the day, the most people in this industry, I think we're here because of the community. Most homebrewers are doing it because of the community, right? It's always been this very social thing, and I think that across the world that it attracts a very similar style of person as well. We're kind of the rejects that couldn't do anything else, right? In a way, and
Yeah,
I think that's that makes it really dynamic and interesting, right? So I think people should take the opportunity to get to know the people in their industry, both locally and internationally.
yeah. I usually end off on just asking the person for a tip, to brew better, one random tip. But in your case, I'd like to ask some practical tips you may have for those competing with the April Brewer. Not just in terms of the
Oh,
competition,
cool.
but just some practical tips with the brewer itself that maybe they may not be used to help them brew better coffee.
So I mean, with the risk of everyone doing this now, let's see. I mean, first of all, competition is about standing
Yeah.
out, right? So bring yourself to the table. That's very important. But in general, I would say pre-grind your coffee. So a lot of people are, it's all of this kind of stigma on coffee has to be freshly
Yeah.
ground. It has to be freshly roasted. Definitely not freshly roasted. But when I compete and in our own stores here in Copenhagen, we pre-grind all of the coffee, pre-grind and dose directly the night before service because it
Wow.
alleviates CO2 in the coffee and actually makes for a much, much cleaner taste experience. So that's
Oh.
usually a hack I tell like homebrewers in general as well. So like, if you brew a morning coffee, grind it in the evening when you go to bed. Put it in a sealed jar, what you grind, and don't grind all of it, grind the dose. But that's gonna taste way better. Apart from that, with the April Brewer, so we usually do, and I always say that this is a good recommendation. When you do a pour over, that first individual pour you do is really there to saturate all of the coffee. Like you need to pour a lot of water. A lot of people pour way too little
Mm.
water. Say you have a 13-gram dose or a 15-gram dose, and you pour maybe 30, 40, 50 grams of water, way too little. You're never going to saturate that coffee uniformly. You need to pour a lot more water so all of that coffee can get wet. And what you have to keep in mind, this is a pure kind of competition thing, but if you then make it to the final in the April Brewers Cup, you're going to brew 3 cups at the same time. And the challenge with that and the reason why we do larger pours is consistency. So you need to make sure that all of that coffee gets wet in 3 brews at the same time at the exact same time. And the way you do that is to pour more water. So it's really like a hack for a more consistent brew.
Well, that's awesome. Obviously, in prepping for this, I wrote down like 1,000 things that stood out, and obviously cut out most of it. But I was very fascinated by the pre-grinding as well. So I'm glad you touched on that because obviously you did that in your set as well.
Makes a massive, massive difference. Also, which you're not allowed to do in barista when you compete, but we do the same with all the espressos we serve as well, and it just tastes way better and is a lot more consistent throughout the day in brewing as well. So there's a bunch of these small little hacks. Maybe play with the water temperature, as I said before as well. That's always like that's a really interesting one. Just do it in the right way.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I think that there's a lot of people going to get a ton of value from this and maybe rewatch and definitely take some notes before the champs. But very excited for that. Thanks for all the
Super
work that
awesome.
you're doing in the industry and your openness as well. I think, it's so big. We need more people that are actually just open and willing to share. So really appreciate everything, man.
Yeah, and thank you for having me, and hopefully I catch you within a few
Yeah, yeah.
weeks, right? And set up here.
Awesome.
We'll
Thanks,
see.
Patrick.